Hi, and welcome to lab number one. This video is for my C# folks, and what we're going to do today is we're going to look at lab number one. We're going to talk about arrays and loops, two-dimensional arrays, and how to go about using them. And then we're going to take a look at the lab for today and see how to get started on that. All right, so as usual, every week you're going to come to the FYE site, you're going to click on labs and assignments, and then under here you're going to click on 1322 labs, and you'll see today's lab is listed in there. When you pop it open, this is what the lab looks like. And what you're doing today is you're going to work with some ASCII art. You're basically going to be able to draw this little car, and then you're going to use some code to reverse the car so that it's pointing in the other direction, and then you're going to draw a little car accident because reasons. Okay, so we're going to get you started with some code, but I'm going to go over some of the topics that we're going to do in this lab. So the first thing that you're going to need is an installation of Visual Studio. If you don't already have Visual Studio installed, you're going to go to your favorite web search engine, and you're going to type in download Visual Studio, and that will bring you to this page. And in here, you'll see a download of Visual Studio Community Edition, which is the free version. That's the one you're going to want. The others are going to have cost. The free community version is good for everything that we're going to do in this lab. So you're going to click that, let it download and install. And then once it's installed, when you open it up, you should be able to see something like this. This is 2019. You can certainly use the 2022 version, which is what I think you will download nowadays, or 2021, either way. So when you start each week, what you're going to do is you're going to create a new project. So each lab and each assignment that you do should be in a project by itself. Every week, what you're going to do is you're going to choose a console application that has C# listed. So you're going to need a C# console application as your template. You're going to hit next, and you're going to give it a name. This is going to be lab 1. And probably put your name in there if you want to do that. You can see it's telling you where it's going to put it. That's useful information. It's almost always going to be in C:\users and then your username. Inside of that folder, you're going to find a source folder, and in there you're going to find a repos folder, and in there is where your code for your lab that you're going to turn in each week is going to be. So at the end of your lab, you're going to want to find your .cs files in here, and that's what you're actually going to want to turn in. So when you hit next, it's going to ask which .NET version do you care about, and that's fine. Use the default and then hit create, and it should pop you into the IDE. And in the IDE, it's going to give you the skeleton code that it always gives you to start with for a new project. So here you can see it's using system. That's always going to be at the top. And then we are going to be put into a namespace that has the name of the project. I called mine Lab 1 Endosullivan. And then inside of that, you're going to see a class program. And inside of class program, you're going to have a static void main, which is your main method. So if you're writing additional methods, they're going to go above this static void main inside of the class. So you would put any new methods in here. And in this case, if you're going to write any code in main, you would write that code here. All right, and so they give you a little hello world, and that's just so that you can test to make sure everything is working. If I hit this button up at the top, it's going to compile and run my code, and you can see what's going to happen is it's going to pop open a window, and sure enough, in the window it says hello world, and at the bottom it says press any key to close the window. So that's what it looks like if I run that. All right, so that's how you get started in here. Once you are ready to go inside of Visual Studio, you're going to want to actually work on the lab this week. So for this week's lab, you're going to need to create a two-dimensional array. So let's review how you do that. In the case of this two-dimensional array, for lab this week, you're going to be creating an array of characters. Each one of these individual characters is going to be stored in one of the cells in an array. And so when you're thinking of a 2D array, what you probably want to think about is an Excel spreadsheet. And so if we pop open an Excel spreadsheet, you're probably familiar with this general layout where you have rows, which are down here, row A, B, C, D, row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have columns, which are column A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So in this particular case for this car, you're going to be creating, I believe it's a 4 by 11 2D array. And that means effectively you're going to be using 4 rows, and I said 11, but I really meant 13, and you're going to be using 13 columns, which is pretty much this space here. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight that in yellow. Ooh, that's really bright yellow. Let's do a thinner yellow. And there we have it. Okay, so The downside of that is I have removed all of the squares. So let me put the squares back in there. Okay, this was a bad idea. Let's not highlight the cells. All right, so you're going to be using 4 cells, 4 rows. So effectively, the way that this car is going to be drawn is that if we look at the last row of data, you can see that there is an equal sign in it. So that would be this row here. So it looks like it starts with an equals. In the next cell, there's a quote. In the next cell, the quote got removed because it's not a quote. Okay, well, Excel is removing the quote, but that won't be a problem when you're dealing with your actual code. There's a dash in the next cell, there's a parenthesis, open paren, there's an underscore in this one, there's a closed paren in that one, there's a dash, open paren, underscore, closed paren, dash, and a quote. And so that's pretty much what one of the rows looks like. And so it kind of looks like gibberish, but as you can see when you print it out, you get what looks to be a car. And this is, if I highlight that, that's the row above it. That's row number 2, and row number 1 just has the roof of the car. All right, so when you create a 2-dimensional array, you can put individual items into each one of the cells. In this case, because it's a 4 by 13, you would have row 0, row 1, row 2, and row 3. And that's weird because everything is numbered from 0. So I said there are 4 rows, but again, those are going to be known as row 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then you have 13 columns, which are going to be known as column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. All right, so remember, anytime you're dealing with an array, everything is 0 indexed. All right, so if we go back over to our Visual Studio window, I'm going to go ahead and create a character array, and I'm going to do something slightly different than Lab, just to give you an example. I'm going to create an array of characters that has 2-dimensional, and that's how you're going to specify you want a 2-dimensional array. And then you give it a name. I'm going to call it my array, and then it equals a new character array that's going to be, in my case, 2 rows and 3 columns, because that's what I'm going to do for this example. All right, so to visualize what I'm doing for my example, I'm going to erase all of this data that I just put in here, and oh, there we go. Oh goodness. All right. That's what I tried to do. All right, so to be clear, I'm building an array that looks like this. 2 rows, 3 columns. Into the first column, I'm going to put A, B, and then C, and that's the first row. And then I'm going to put D, E, and F into the second row. And I'm going to do these just individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the A in. So I'm going to say my array at position 0, 0 is equal to A. All right, so there's a couple of things to note here. I'm using 0, 0 to indicate row 0, column 0. So the first number represents the row, the second represents the column. And I'm assigning it an A, and I'm using single quotes because it's a character. If I'm storing a string, I would use double quotes, but if I'm storing a character, it's going to be a single quote. All right, so now that I've done that, into row 0, column 1, I'm going to put my B. Into row 0, column 2, I'm going to put my C. All right, so that fills out my first row, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. Next, I'm going to put the D into row 1, column 0. So my array at 1, 0 is equal to D, and then 1, 1 is equal to E, and then finally 1, 2 is equal to F. Okay, semicolon after the quote. There we go. So that created me a 2-dimensional array. Right now, if I run this code, nothing has changed. The only thing I get is this hello world, because I haven't actually done anything with the array. I've created it, I've put some data into it, but I'm not actually doing anything with it. So it would be really nice if I could print out my array and actually see it on the screen. All right, so in order to print out an array, you're almost always going to use a loop. 2-dimensional arrays are going to be a little bit trickier than just a single loop, because you're going to need one loop that iterates over the rows, and then a separate loop that iterates over the columns. So the outer loop, which does the rows, I'm going to start off and I'm going to use a for loop. I'm going to say for int row equals 0, row less than 2 row plus plus. All right, now there's a couple of things here. Why did I start off with row equals 0, not row equals 1? Because arrays are indexed from 0. The second question is, why did I say row less than 2? Well, I have 2 rows, and less than 2 is going to mean that when this loop starts off, row is going to be set equal to 0. In a moment, row is going to become 1. And then when row tries to become 2, because of this plus plus, 2 is not less than 2, so it's going to exit. So effectively, this loop is going to iterate 2 times. The first time row is going to be equal to 0. The second time row is going to be equal to 1, and then the loop is going to end. All right, so that's going to iterate over my rows. Now I need one that iterates over my columns. So inside of that loop, I'm going to say for int column equals 0, column less than 3, because I have 3 columns, column plus plus. All right, and again, things to notice here, I started at 0 and I did less than 3, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2. Now, you might say, why am I specifically putting this loop inside of that loop? Well, it's because I want the outer loop to do an entire row, and the inner loop will then do 0, 1, 2. But when I move on to the next row, I want the inner loop to do 0, 1, and 2 again, because there could be a third row and a fourth row and a fifth row. So each time I do an outer row, I want it to also allow me to do all of the cells in the inner row. All right, so now I'm going to print out console.write, and I'm going to print out my array at position row, comma, column. All right, so let's just run this and let's see what we get. So weirdly, I get A, B, C, D, E, F, and then I still have the hello world because I never got rid of that. So let me comment out the hello world because we don't need that. That's just default code that they gave you. So if I run it again, I'm just going to see A, B, C, D, E, F, which is a little confusing because really I should have seen A, B, C, and then D, E, F on a separate row. So why am I not seeing them row by row? Well, it's because a write, as opposed to a write line, is just going to print it out without putting in a carriage return. And even if I had said write line, I would not have gotten what I wanted. I would have instead gotten A, B, C, D, E, F, where each letter is on a line by itself. So what I really want is I wanted the write, that was the correct thing, but at the end of each row, I want to write line a blank line. Because after I've printed out the ABC, which is what's happening in this loop, this is printing cell 0, cell 1, cell 2 in row 0. When it's done, I then want to print a carriage return on the screen, which has the effect of moving me to the beginning of the next line. Then the outer loop will move me to row 1, and the inner loop will start at 0, do 1, and then do 2. And so I will print out all of the information that I wanted. So that's how you print out a two-dimensional array. It's going to look something similar to that. Of course, these names are irrelevant. You could call them I and J and it would work the same, but row and column seems to make a little bit of sense. All right, so the next thing that the lab is asking you to do is it's asking you to reverse one of the rows such that you're seeing it in reverse. So what it wants is for this row C, B, A, and for this row it would be F, E, D. And that's because we're rotating all the letters around. So how do you go about doing that? Well, effectively for the first row, and I'm just going to show you how to do the first row manually, and then I'll let you figure it out for the bigger sense. In the first row, what I need to do is I need to take what's in cell 0 and what's in cell 2, and I need to reverse them. And that's going to do what I want. So your first gut might be to say my array at cell 0, 2 is equal to my array at cell 0, 0, and then take my array at 0, 0 and set it equal to my array at 0, 2. Now, that seems to make sense. I said take whatever is in 0, 0 and stick it into 0, 2, take whatever is in 0, 2 and stick it into 0, 0. But if I run this, and I'm just going to move this code, I'm going to make a copy of this code, and I'm going to paste it in underneath where I did this change, and I'm just going to add in a comment console write line after change. Okay, so just so I can see what's going on here, I'm going to run this, and what I'm trying to get is A, B, C, D, E, F reversed, so I'm supposed to be seeing C, B, A, but in actuality, what I'm going to see is not that. And that is being weird. Why is that being weird? Did I not hit run? Okay, I guess I didn't hit run, sorry. So I didn't get CBA, I got ABA. My C just disappeared. Why is that? Well, the moment that I told it to take whatever's in cell 2, which was the C, and replace it with whatever's in cell 0, which is the A, I've lost the C. Whatever was in that cell 02 is now gone. So what I needed to do was, before I did that, I needed to store that value somewhere temporarily. So I'm going to make a car temp, and I'm going to assign to it my array at 02. So I'm basically taking whatever's in cell 2, which is that C, I'm storing it in a temp, then I'm going to change whatever's in A and put it into, whatever's in cell 0 and put it into cell 2. And in the end, what I'm going to put back into cell 0 is not what's in cell 2, but it's instead going to be temp. And so now I'm going to run it again, and we're going to see that that's going to have the effect of, what am I doing? Why is that not running? There it is. That's going to have the effect of giving me CBA instead of ABC. All right. So that's how you reverse two things. You don't just say this one gets that one gets this one. You're going to need a third variable, which is a temp variable. You're going to take one side, stick it in the temp, move the other one over, and then move the temp back down to the original place. And so that's what I did with those 3 lines. So that's how you would do it if there were only 3 columns in the array. In the case of the lab, there's going to be 13. So you're going to need to use a loop to do that rather than to just manually reverse each one. A couple of thoughts that I'm going to give you there are, when you use the loop, remember that you only have to reverse half of the array. And what I mean by that is, if I take my Excel spreadsheet again, I'm just going to continue this out a little bit more. So I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and then G, H, I, J, K, and L. Okay, so if I want to reverse this row, I'm going to take the first letter and the last letter and reverse them. All right, so I'm going to put the F in here, and I'm going to put the A in here. Then I'm going to move on to the remaining letters in the middle, and I'm going to take the B and the E and reverse them. So the E goes here and the B goes there. Then I'm going to move into the middle letters, and I'm going to put the D here and the C there. Okay, so I've successfully rotated the array. But notice that I only did half of the array, because as you do each swap, you're not having to do it with everything. Let me rephrase that slightly. If I take A and reverse it with F, B and reverse it with E, and C and reverse it with D, I end up with this. If I then keep going and take D and reverse it with C, and then I take B and reverse it with E, and then take A and reverse it with F, notice that I get right back to where I originally started. So you only need to move half of the array to the other side. You don't need to keep going, because if you keep going, you're going to put it right back to the way that it was. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to use a loop, you're going to go through the array, and you're going to have all of the items switched over to the far side. Okay, so hopefully that gets you started on this. And when you're done with this, you're going to submit your code into Gradescope. And as I showed you before, what you're going to need to do is you're going to go to your computer. You're going to go to the directory that it showed you, which in my case was C:users eSully13. And then there was a source directory. Inside of there, there's a repos directory. Inside of there is the lab. That's the name of whatever I created. Inside of there, you will find a lab1-esullivan.cs project. And then in here, you'll also find program.cs. It's that program.cs that you're turning in. And if you ever want to double check, if you're in Windows, you can ask it to open it with Notepad, and you should see your code that you wrote. If you're not seeing your code, then you're not looking at the right thing. But you're looking for the .cs file, not the CS project file. All right, and in my case, it's called program, and that's because the actual code was in a program.cs. You can see it up there. All right, so once you've got that file, that's what you're going to submit into Gradescope, and you're going to submit it as lab number 1. And then you can move on to your assignment if you have an assignment this week. All right, so that's it for this week, and I hope that was informative and you guys are in good shape to get started, and I will see you next week.